In the Jalisco highlands, a man commanding an army of sicarios exists in a state of total biological dependence on plastic tubes. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, known as El Mencho, is a ghost in the mountains. But this disappearance has a clinical price. How do you maintain a sterile medical environment in a dirt-floor mountain hideout? One session of hemodialysis requires up to 150 liters of ultra-pure water. Transporting this volume through hostile terrain is more complex than moving a shipment of assault rifles. The cartel does not just move drugs, it moves a mobile hospital. The process is mechanical. A technician wipes the boss's arm with antiseptic. The needle enters the vein. A pump hums, pulling blood through a synthetic filter to strip away toxins his kidneys can no longer process. The machine does not care about his power. It only cares about the flow rate. Outside the door, men with Barrett 50 caliber rifles watch the perimeter. Inside, the most wanted man in Mexico lies motionless for 4 hours. He is tethered. He is fragile. He is a patient whose body is failing faster than his legend. The contrast is absolute. A multi-billion-dollar empire halts because one man's blood is turning into poison. This is the hidden logistics of survival in the 2023 Jalisco highlands. While the machine hums, the hierarchy of the CJNG shifts toward a new generation. Power begins to flow to his son, Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez. Long before the dialysis machine in Jalisco became his lifeline, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was a single entry in the United States deportation statistics. The American machine failed to crush him. It provided a blueprint. In the early 1990s, U.S. authorities processed his final expulsion. They saw a failed migrant. They missed the transition. Why did the deportation system fail to break the illegal laborer? It exported a functional cell of a future empire. The origin point, July 17, 1966. The municipality of Aguililla, Michoacán, a region so isolated that supply trucks still struggle with the terrain. Nemesio grew up in the dirt. He dropped out of primary school. He spent his youth harvesting avocados. He followed the trail of hundreds of thousands before him. He crossed the border illegally. He reached the Central Valley of California. The logistics of the region were absolute. In the 1980s and 90s, California's Central Valley produced 80% of the state's agricultural output. This system relied entirely on undocumented labor. Nemesio was a ghost in the fields. He picked crops for a country that ignored his existence. The shift was mechanical. He moved from harvesting produce to moving small quantities of narcotics, then larger loads. Local police recorded multiple arrests. The U.S. government finally triggered the removal process. They sent him back across the border. The undocumented laborer returned to Mexico with a refined understanding of American distribution networks. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes crossed back into Mexico in the early 1990s. Returning to Mexico in the 1990s, the former laborer secured a new employer, Ignacio Coronel. Known as Nacho, Coronel was a primary architect of the Sinaloa cartel. Nacho managed the mountain of cocaine flowing toward the border. Nemesio watched. He studied the internal mechanics of a multi-billion-dollar empire. He analyzed how leadership vacuums formed and how organizations fractured under federal pressure. How do you technically announce the birth of a new syndicate in 2009? You wait for a collapse. The fall of the Milenio cartel in 2009 created a logistical void on Mexico's west coast. It was a vacancy worth billions. Nemesio did not see a disaster, he saw an opening. Alongside Eric Valencia Salazar, alias L85, he engineered the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. 3 mutilated bodies appeared in Cancun. This was the opening ceremony. A white van sat idling on a busy road. Police opened the rear doors. Inside, they found the remains. Limbs were severed, torsos were stacked like cordwood. On top of the pile lay a piece of cardboard. The ink was dark. The handwriting was steady. The message was pinned to a chest by a knife. The scent of copper and exhaust filled the air. 35 bodies total would soon follow in similar displays across the region. This was not random sadism. It was a corporate rebranding. The message left on the bodies warned rivals that the old rules of the plaza had expired. The catalyst for an unprecedented militarization of the apparatus was not a strategy, but a spilled glass of hibiscus tea at a meeting in Guadalajara. The room is silent. A glass of dark red agua de Jamaica tilts. The liquid spreads across the polished wood of the table. One guest flinches. El Mencho stares at the stain. The sound of the glass hitting the surface echoes like a gunshot. Respect in this room is not a courtesy. It is a currency backed by blood. How does a minor domestic conflict transform into a threat to national security? A single perceived insult triggered an immediate order for mass executions. The chain reaction of violence killed hundreds of people within weeks. In a normal world, a spilled drink ruins a dinner. In his world, a spilled drink ruins a city. This is the psychology of an ego commanding a private army. The technical scale of the consequences soon matched the level of the rage. The United States Department of State placed a $15 million bounty on his head. The number is precise. It is a calibrated message. $15 million is the exact sum the United States offered for the head of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. It is the price reserved for the most destabilizing threats to global security on the planet. For the American government, the former crop picker from California had reached the same status as the world's most wanted international terrorists. An ego capable of triggering a bloodbath over a spilled drink had a different calculation by April 1, 2015. In the hills of Jalisco, the CJNG moved from street thuggery to synchronized warfare. A federal police convoy entered the kill zone. It was not a skirmish. It was a military-grade execution. Mencho's gunmen opened fire with equipment reserved for sovereign armies. Lead tore through the armored plating of the lead vehicles. 15 federal officers died in that single tactical ambush. A government helicopter crested the ridge to provide air support for the dying. The militants did not scatter. They shouldered Soviet-made rocket launchers. One shot. The tail rotor disintegrated. Black plumes of smoke choked the Jalisco sky as the state's multi-million-dollar asset tumbled into the dirt. President Enrique Peña Nieto reacted with the largest domestic mobilization in the history of the republic. Thousands of federal troops flooded the state. They established ironclad checkpoints. They locked down every major artery. The full weight of the Mexican state pressed down on the mountains. El Mencho simply walked through the encirclement and vanished into the high peaks. The CJNG declared war on the Sinaloa Federation, Los Zetas, and the Knights Templar at the same time. Why declare war on the three largest syndicates simultaneously when analysts call it pure suicide? Because El Mencho did not want a seat at the table. He wanted the table. Sinaloa used a scalpel. They relied on corruption, political ties, and calculated hits. El Mencho chose a sledgehammer. While thousands of soldiers combed the Jalisco mountains for one man, his apparatus launched an offensive on 20 fronts. This was not a chaotic sprawl. It was a cold, systemic calculation. By 2014, the cartel established a physical presence in 20 Mexican states. This meant direct control over 60% of the country's sovereign territory. The logistics of expansion moved faster than the government's ability to map them. By 2020, the scale of the machinery forced the United States to trigger Operation Python. The takedown was surgical. DEA agents kicked in reinforced doors across America. They moved from room to room, clearing hallways and zip-tying hundreds of CJNG operatives. On the tables, they found the ledger books, the paper trail of a continental empire. Then came the cash. Officers hauled out heavy duffel bags filled with vacuum-sealed bricks of currency. The room smelled of fresh ink from the stacks of seized bills. They counted $22 million in a single sweep. Despite the pressure, the system held. The apparatus now functioned in 22 states. The expansion continued, but the architecture of power was shifting. Local commanders began seizing initiative in the provinces. They stopped waiting for orders from the mountains. The central vertical collapsed into a horizontal web of regional warlords. This was the transition from a cult of personality to a corporate machine of death. The founder became a symbol. The commanders became the board of directors. In 2023, the United States extradited Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez. El Menchito was gone. The only blood heir was off the board. This extraction stripped the cartel of its dynastic future. It was no longer a family business. It was a cold, high-tech syndicate managed by a council of veterans. By August 2024, the Sinaloa cartel fractured. Internal rivalries turned into a catastrophic civil war after a key leader fell. It was the perfect moment for total dominance. The primary rival was cannibalizing itself. Any empire builder would have struck, but the machine's creator was failing. Despite the success of the expansion and the collapse of the Sinaloa rivals in August 2024, the primary threat to the leader came from within his own body. His kidneys were failing. The man who once outran federal Blackhawks was now chained to a dialysis machine. Every movement required a medical team. Every breath was a logistical operation. Intelligence reports described a ghost. He was disconnected. He was fading. He was a biological malfunction at the center of a digital speed war. The paradox was absolute. The more efficient the CJNG became, the less it needed El Mencho. He had built a system so ruthless it could replace its own heart without dropping a beat. The machine had outgrown its architect. The countdown began in the mountains of Jalisco. The mountain perimeter was narrowing. The date was set, February 22nd, 2026. A medical monitor beeps inside a moving military helicopter. Below the rotors, the colonial streets of Talpa, Jalisco sit empty. In peacetime, tourists from Guadalajara take selfies in these quiet plazas and drink coffee under the Sierra Madre peaks. On the morning of February 22, 2026, the selfies stop. How does a man who controlled half a country die? On a tactical stretcher, bleeding out from bullet wounds. The Mexican Air Force tracked his position to a mountain perimeter. His mobility was gone. The leader of the world's most violent cartel was tethered to a hemodialysis machine. At 59 years old, his kidneys had failed. The biological machine was breaking down faster than his empire. The assault was surgical. Mexican Special Forces and the National Guard hit the compound at dawn. 4 cartel members died in the initial exchange of gunfire. 3 others were pulled from the wreckage alive, including the target. Soldiers lift the 590-year-old Cervantes onto a stretcher. The deafening roar of the engine drowns out the quiet of the mountain forest. Inside the bay, the air smells of copper and antiseptic. Plastic tubes snake from portable IV drips into a body wasted by chronic illness and fresh lead. The flight path to Mexico City covers 600 kilometers. It is a distance his failing organs cannot bridge. As the craft crosses the sky, the man who shaped Mexico with fear for 15 years stares at the ceiling. The onboard medic checks a pulse. He finds nothing. At mid-flight, the Defense Ministry confirms the cessation of vital signs. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was pronounced dead in the air. $15 million. The U.S. State Department placed this price on one head. For a decade, the bounty remained unclaimed. It exceeded the annual operating budgets of dozens of Mexican municipalities where the cartel recruits its infantry. The man in the helicopter was no longer a ghost. He was Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes. The military tracked him to the Sierra Madre Mountains. The target stayed within 80 miles of Guadalajara. He relied on the jagged terrain of Talpa to mask his movements. He believed the peaks made him untouchable. Intelligence agencies and 2 governments spent 10 years on this single operational development. The hunt required thousands of flight hours and millions in satellite surveillance. It focused on one biological unit. The joint operation between Mexico and the United States effectively closed its file. While the Mexican Ministry of Defense processed the official death certificate for Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, the CJNG infrastructure activated its autonomous response protocol. The machine did not wait for a funeral. Tactical units moved first. In Guadalajara, gunmen seized freight trucks and public buses. They doused the chassis in gasoline. Thick black smoke from burning tires and diesel fuel choked the main arteries of the city. Streets emptied. Shops shuttered. The scent of scorched rubber hung over abandoned plazas as if the city were bracing for an invasion. Did the boss's death halt the logistics of fentanyl? Not a single shipment headed for the United States or Europe was canceled. The U.S. Embassy issued immediate shelter-in-place advisories across multiple states. This was the system in motion. While vehicles burned in Jalisco, the supply chain remained invisible and functional. It moved synthetic opioids across the border in an automated loop. No verbal orders were required. The routes for methamphetamine and cocaine already stretched into the ports of Rotterdam and the markets of Tokyo. This was the industrialization of the vacuum. One man died in a helicopter, but 15 years of engineering stayed behind. The death of the architect did not collapse the skyscraper. It merely triggered a succession sequence. On the same day the ministry confirmed the kill, the export of chemical precursors continued across 4 continents. This transnational network was engineered by a man who never finished primary school. His journey began in the dust of Aguililla. In the state of Michoacán, the government barely acknowledged the existence of his village. The boy spent his days picking avocados for a few pesos. Poverty was the only certainty. Was a classroom education necessary to dismantle a state? The answer lies in the architecture of the CJNG. He traded the fruit groves for the black market, eventually designing a corporate military hybrid that defied every standard law enforcement model. The contrast is absolute. On one side, the combined intelligence resources of the United States and Mexico. 10 years of satellite surveillance, wiretaps, and billions of dollars in hardware. On the other side, a man who dropped out of school before age 10. He died in a mountain town he chose specifically because it was far from everything. There was no dramatic courtroom appearance, no extradition, no public confession. The $15 million bounty on his head was never collected. He died as he lived, in motion, hidden by the terrain and protected by the very poverty that birthed him. His death is a grim macroeconomic reality. Killing the architect does not stop the blueprints from being executed. The destruction of one man is a hollow victory when the systemic failure of the state continues to produce thousands more with nothing to lose. Tonight, in the hidden hills of Jalisco, the cookers are still heating the glass. Not a single shipment of synthetic precursors has been delayed.